like I said, we all experienced some form of trauma in our childhood. But that really shapes our beliefs in life. So I imagine, someone who has that fear of losing a parent or has lost a parent, that would often lead to a fear of abandonment. And then that, that translates into our relationship with our romantic partner, right? And then that would lead to probably some anxiety in the relationship, fears that your partner is going to leave if you do something wrong, that it's not secure.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world saying, okay, we know Canada and we heard of British Columbia and we think we know Vancouver and British Columbia. Where are you, Prince George? Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our friends in Europe, 800 kilometers. That puts us in the center of British Columbia, an amazing province. Lots of animals, lots of trees, lots of nature, and Prince George, relatively small community, about 80,000 people. Within 50 miles around us, we have probably 100 lakes. So it is a nature paradise for all those people that come to visit us or live here as well. Today, a very special guest. Her name is Kayla Crane. And Kayla is a specialist licensed marriage family therapist, and she is the owner of South Denver Therapy and specializes in relationships and mental health. Renowned for her practical advice and insights, she is an ideal guide to seeking improvement in emotional and rational being relationships. So, and then also specializes, I believe, in communication, because that a lot of times is the foundation of a lot of things. Kayla, welcome to my
Hi,
show.
thanks for having me.
So, you are in Denver, Colorado, and so give us a bit of a background on yourself. Are you from there originally, or take us through your background, your education, and to where you are today?
Yeah, I was born in Southern California in northern Los Angeles. And when I graduated high school, I moved down to Orange County. And so I lived there the second half of my life, so from 1918 on. And then about 4 years ago, my husband, myself, and my two little kids moved here to Colorado. So it was a big change after living in California my whole life. My daughter is 7 and my son is 5. I went to school for my master's in counseling psychology when my daughter was, I started when I was 5 months pregnant. And let's see, I graduated when she was about a year and a half. It was an accelerated program. And I went through my internship in high school working with teens. And then I took a little bit of a break to be a stay-at-home mom. After that, once we moved to Colorado, I began working with couples. And I never thought I was going to work with couples. And it turned out I really liked it. So I got trained in some particular modalities. In addition to that, I had some trauma therapy myself using what's called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So it's a handful, but so we use eye movements to process trauma. It's one of the most preferred modalities to treat trauma. It's pretty cool. So I also got trained in that. So I also specialize in trauma.
I never heard of that.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah,
EDM,
it's
yeah, yeah.
EMDR. Yeah, we use eye
EM.
movements similar to ones that you experience in REM sleep, and we
Okay.
use that to process trauma. So it is highly preferred because you don't have to talk so much, right? Typical trauma treatment is just talking through it.
Right.
which can work with a specialist, someone who specializes in trauma. But
Right.
it can be kind of painful, right? Talking through these traumas. And so EMDR, you don't have to talk about it too much. So it is preferred in
It,
that way. And yeah, it's pretty cool to. I had that experience myself. My therapist did EMDR with me, and it worked so well
so
that I
what?
went and
So
got.
tell me something about EMDR because I'd never heard of that. So it directly relates to REM sleeping. Tell us all. For those that don't, a lot of people know about REM, but it is the deep sleep. Maybe explain that a little bit to us, and then how it goes into EDMR.
Yeah, so it doesn't. I wouldn't say they're directly related. However, just the eye movements that you experience are similar. And the person who developed EMDR was actually discovered while she was thinking about a traumatic experience. She was moving her eyes. I think she was taking a walk or something, and she realized that that was helping process it. So it's really cool because in addition to moving your eyes, it's also the big concept is it's called bilateral stimulation. So it's like left to right. So when we do EMDR, we move our fingers and we have someone's eyes moving from left to right. Additionally, you can tap or there can be there's a few different ways to do it, but you're moving the left and right sides while you're processing it. So we use eye movements. The first step is to desensitize. So when you experience a trauma, you have triggers, right, which elicit an emotional response. Um, when we desensitize that, we minimize those triggers. So I had it done on a bad car accident that I had experienced. And certain things would make me get really upset when I would get triggered. I would see, a particular area on the road or something that would trigger me, but I got desensitized to that. So seeing that area didn't like elicit this emotional response. Um,
So
and then
you think about it then the trauma, or you re-experience it, or something triggers it that reminds you of it then, and then you start doing what?
for the during EMDR or when I experience a trauma.
So when you do the EDMR and something is triggering it, and then you use the eye movement to think through it again, then just trying to understand
So
it.
yeah, no. So when you go through it, the practitioner guides you in a specific way, and
Right,
they have you um think about the traumatic memory
right,
itself,
right,
and then they have you think about certain parts of it. They guide you through it in a particular way.
right.
While you're thinking of that, they do the eye movements or the bilateral stimulation. And
Okay.
so while you're thinking about it, you're reprocessing it. So first the way that our brains work can somehow take out like the emotional piece of it. So in the end, I don't we can't erase what happened, right?
No,
It happened. However, when I used to think about that experience, I might cry or I'd get really overwhelmed.
right,
But now I think about it as more of like a bad memory,
right.
um, rather than a trauma. So sometimes clients will explain it to me like there seems like there's distance from the
Yeah,
memory, if that makes sense, because when it's traumatic, you kind of feel like you're in it again,
yeah.
right?
I can see the emotional reaction would not be there like that, but
Right.
more rational. Something that did
Right.
happen. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
The therapy in relationships in particular is something that happens virtually with everybody, and relationships in a way are natural, but at the other hand, they are not necessarily. And so obviously we go through all the relationships in right from the beginning to individuals that are individuals in their own right, and then going, especially these days, but probably always before that as well, go through all the ups and downs, and then to reconcile or to stay. The relationship starts with going on a date, falling in love with somebody, and then from there and then developing the relationship, and then the next thing that happens, we got the engaged maybe, and all the good things that happen, and then from there and then we get married, and then the next thing that happens, we have children, and then economic realities become an issue, and then all of a sudden challenges happen along the way, which may have adverse effects on the relationship, or worse, and people start drifting apart, and then what happens next is you're starting to fall out of love, potentially, and then it becomes a question of the difficult part happens, and I've gone through it years and years ago, but I've been together with my wife for well over 40 years, but we have gone through a period that is saying we need to see a counselor, and that doesn't always come natural, especially not for guys. Maybe the same as women, respectfully, and being in counseling can be a great help to create that connection again, or to find what challenges are underlying a lot of the relationships. In my case, this was probably 35 years ago, so I was born in 1940, so I'm nearly 84 years old, in the northeastern part of Holland. Grew up during the Second World War, and my mom and dad were married in 1938 already. Before the war, they were in love, and they had a career, and very quickly they had one child, a boy, and then a girl, and then the war started. And then my dad was called into the Dutch army, and the last time they heard from him was in the bombing of Rotterdam, and they would not know for 5 years if he was dead or alive. And so my mom, with the two kids, and she was pregnant with me, I was born in November, had 3 little kids to go through the war years, and it was very, very, very challenging. And so during our counseling that we had, then coming back to my marriage, is that the fear of losing that one parent, because affected me, and so the counselor during the counseling said, I'd like to have, probably bouncing it by the two of you, meaning my wife and me, and say, I believe that John and me should have a discussion about the inner child. I never even heard about the inner child. And so we agreed to do that, and then had the counseling, and that laid on the foundation of a lot of things, and very emotional, actually. I was well into my 50s then, years old, and so it gave me then the exposure of a very emotional period, but that's just one example of. So I'm a believer in that through relationships in particular, we go through the ups and downs, and then we are not always as thoughtful about communications as we can be, because it's a specialty that we are not always very good at, especially not in difficult situations, to seek then the advice of a special person that has been trained in improving or reigniting relationships is very, very important. And obviously the relationship lies on the foundation of our lives, very, very critical. And recognizing that is, I'm certainly very much an advocate of it.
Yeah, I definitely that is something that I incorporate a lot in my work with couples is the inner child work, because I tell people all the time it all goes back to our childhood. So someone who experienced, a childhood trauma, well, like I said, we all experienced some form of trauma in our childhood, but that really shapes our beliefs in life. So I imagine, someone who has that fear of losing a parent or has lost a parent, that would often lead to a fear of abandonment. And then that, that translates into our relationship with our romantic partner, right? And then that would lead to probably some anxiety in the relationship, fears that your partner is going to leave if you do something wrong, that it's not secure. Um, Attachment styles are a big piece of that too, which are formed in early childhood, and they're just ways that we kind of operate in relationships. So, um, that would probably result in some kind of anxious attachment, which is again that fear that your partner's going to leave or the relationship's going to end. A lot of times we see with that an anxious attachment, people they get in one argument or conflict with their partner and they go to, oh my gosh, our relationship's going to be over. Then all those anxious thoughts where you go looking at a problem 10 steps ahead. So yeah, that's so important to do that. A lot of people don't recognize that our behaviors all stem from somewhere. They were usually adaptive as children. We call it the inner child. Also as our adaptive child because we had to learn to adapt to our surroundings. Um, so, someone who had an angry parent or a scary parent, they might be very withdrawn. And maybe as a child, that's what they had to do. If their parent was angry, they had to go in their room and hide or something to protect themselves. So, whatever we did as children, that replicates in our relationship as adults, right? We might not necessarily go in the room and hide, maybe, but when there's conflict, maybe they withdraw or escape using substances, or they actually leave the house, or they go play video games, or they just shut
Or
down
do
completely.
not communicate at all, right? So say,
Right?
I'm not going to talk to you, so
Yeah, just
yeah.
shut down. It's like a wall. Um,
So, Kayla, the importance of, and I'm kind of using myself a little bit as an example here, is that I was born in 1940 and during the war years, and it was very, very difficult. Northeastern Holland, close to the 10, 15 minutes from the border with Germany. And then the war years, as I said, my dad was drafted. They didn't know he was dead or alive, and for 5 years. And then we, during from the time that I was 3.5 years old, 4 years old, we had hundreds of bombers, Allied bombers, flying over our area, in particular, bombing the infrastructure that built all the weapons for the German armies then in northern Germany, close to the North Sea. And so my mom would take us outside on a flat roof behind our house because the sound of hundreds of bombers in the air, I still can remember that even still today, a sound that we'll never hear again. But and then we would stand outside because she felt safer outside than inside. And in the distance, we would see the fires of the cities burning in the distance, like Wilhelmshaven, Kiel, Hamburg, all those areas way in the distance. And the sky was full with airplanes flying in different directions or coming back. And then The other part that I remember well from the time I was 4 or 5 is it was then in 1944-45 was the coldest winter on record, and the Germans had cut off all the food supply to most of Holland, and a lot of kids and vulnerable older people died because of hunger. And we as kids, my brother, my sister, 1 year and 2 years older than me, and I was nearly 5 years old then, we would go every morning into the railroad yards and with gunny sacks and pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, because the Germans wouldn't shoot us, but they would boot us one, and we'd be back the following day. And but I still can feel the feeling of hunger, and then the cold. We had only one little stove in one room in the house that kept us warm, and I still can feel even that part. And then we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. That made such an impression on me that I always knew I would go to Canada and to the land of my heroes, and so which I did when I was 23. But just talking about trauma or things that happen in your childhood that we bring into a relationship, but is usually not something that is even looked at, but what we already know even as laypersons, and I've heard it from many, and you will probably comment on this, is that the other part that a lot of people don't understand, respectfully, is that once you have war in Holland for 5 years, then everything doesn't go back to normal as some people think. It doesn't. Sometimes for generations it carries on, like it did in ours, the family. After that, my dad came back after the war, and then, but the relationship was never the same again, and he will never really, he had PTSD, so did I, and then obviously being a child and was affected by that and developed a drinking problem. Issues are all directly and indirectly to the warriors. So it would affect a young person going into the relationships. I can see that it would be very important for somebody that is helping in a relationship going forward, that to kind of look at what happened in childhood, because that would, part of that would carry with them if it is unresolved, and it may well have an adverse effect on a relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever we experience traumas, they result in negative beliefs that we hold about ourselves. So that's where that very end piece of EMDR, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So we take that negative belief that was formed and we reprocess it to a more positive belief. Um, so, somebody who experienced what you experienced might develop a negative belief similar to I'm not safe, I can't count on people, something like that. Depending on, everyone has their own experience. So, and the way that that I can often help people get to that negative belief about themselves, if we're not already there, is when we do that inner child work. I always ask them, what does your inner child need to hear? And a lot of times that's where you'll get the negative belief, or they'll say they needed to hear you are loved. And so that means their negative belief is I'm not lovable. Or they need to hear that you're not going to be alone, right? So there's all kinds of, that's how we can kind of determine that. And then we can say, so if somebody tells their inner child, you are worthy of love, then we've determined in their relationship, when they get triggered, they go to that adaptive child comes out and feels that same way. I'm not worthy of love. And so, when they're regulated and they're sitting here, in the room with me, they know consciously, hopefully often, that that's a negative belief, right? That's from my childhood, or we can work with them to believe that. However, when they get triggered, that still comes out because you don't when you're triggered, you're responding to something that's not in front of you, right? You're responding to something in your childhood that developed that belief. So the way that that can be helpful in relationships is once their partner learns, oh, they don't feel worthy of love when we're in conflict or when they're triggered, they can help them by reminding them. And that's what we do in our sessions. We establish what will help when you're triggered. Um, and, your partner can remind you, I'm upset, but you still are, I still love you. You still deserve to be loved. Or, whatever that is. Somebody might get triggered if they had an angry parent and they start reacting if their partner is yelling and so maybe that partner would say, you're safe. I'm not your father. I'm not your mother who's yelling at you. And so some kind of reassurance to help get the triggered partner more regulated and back into the present moment and out of that negative place where the adaptive child comes out, and they can hopefully help them bring out what we call the functional adult, which is how we're talking right now. We're in our functional adult because we're not triggered. um and so they've got to kind of work as a team to get there. you know they When somebody's dysregulated, their partner, it's really, they can help them get regulated so then they can have, the discussion or repair or whatever they need to do.
Now, every situation is different, right? So that's the challenge for you, in partnerships in particular, to kind of, at least I presume, in your mind, to establish who is who and what lays on the foundation of this. And a lot of times, I'm not an expert. I'm just talking from life experience. Is saying that the all around what has been important to me. I didn't have much confidence in myself. That is not helpful in relationships necessarily. And then the other part is that to have good communications is very, very important. And then then the partners have to feel at peace with who they are in their own world, is because that what I believe is nobody owes you happiness. That is you that has to find that in your own way. And then relationships, from my experience, first and foremost are friendships on the foundation and the ability to be vulnerable. And so that to me is something very important and works well. I'm happily married and have a good relationship, and have a friendship with my wife first and foremost, and then obviously the solid relationship, and then romantic relationship still being in love, even at nearly the mid 80s, and my wife is about mid 70s. So so then there is nothing better than a good relationship, really, and to have that friendship that always is there and that you can rely upon, and sharing the difficulties and your feelings with, in most cases. Right?
Yeah. And you're right. Everyone who comes to see me, I would say nearly everyone, in their goals for treatment, what they're looking for, they say improved communication is at least one of the hopes or goals of our work together. And so there's a lot of people think improved communication is going to look like using I statements, active listening, all that stuff. That's not really what people are looking for. So when people say they're looking for communication, it it's actually more than that. It's a lot of times, so improved communication requires vulnerability, like you were saying. But in order to get vulnerable, you need to understand what you're feeling, right? And so that's a lot where a lot of the work of therapy comes in. Because vulnerability, you've got to express the deeper emotion, not just the frustration, the anger, the stuff on top. You need to be able to communicate. I'm feeling really hurt right now. I'm feeling really disappointed right now. Um, and to get a better understanding to explain to your partner, like, I'm not, when this happens, that's really making me feel like I'm not good enough. And so that also goes back to, that negative belief that was formed in childhood. So then your partner is a lot more open to working with you if you can get to that vulnerable piece. When you just say, I'm so mad at you, that's not really connecting. But when you can really explain, I'm not feeling loved right now, I'm not feeling good enough, or I'm not feeling secure in our relationship, then you guys can work as a team. Okay, we both agree, that we want you to feel loved, or we want you to feel good enough, despite the conflict. Um, so I think that's where it the work really is getting to the deeper stuff and being able to verbalize that. Um, so it when we were oh sorry. So like you said, it is more difficult for men in our society to come to therapy. And that's because men are conditioned to not be vulnerable growing up. We hear phrases like boys don't cry, or just man up, don't, brush it off. And so that instills these negative, like that's what it is to be a man. It's not okay or safe to be vulnerable. Um, because it's almost always covering up a more vulnerable emotion. But men in our society are taught that's what you can be. You can be angry, and that's what's appropriate for a man. So it does take a lot of work there.
So, as they walk into your door together, that's already a big step. So, they must have somehow reconciled that this was the right thing to do. Then the question becomes, did you both agree to do this? Or is the one doing this reluctantly to prove a point that he needs you to confirm that whatever their position is the right one, versus blah, blah, blah. Those kind of complications. But step one is saying, we're going to do this and we'll do it together, whatever that looks like. But then that's the first plus, right?
Yeah. And then I do get a lot of people coming in thinking they're going to just work on I statements, or, that
Yeah.
basic kind of communication stuff. And I do tell them, this is going to require being vulnerable. And I'm thinking of a particular client, and who I've been working with right now, and he came in, very closed off, very difficult to communicate. And then after a while, you've got to like build some rapport and stuff before you jump into asking them to be vulnerable. But actually, what really got him engaged was when we finally did his inner child work. And he was just like, wow, I had no idea, because we don't know. Growing up, and we're just going along thinking this is just how things are. I just believe that I'm not worthy of love when and or can't even put words to it, without doing that work and being able to identify it. And so when we were able to put words to his experience, he oh my gosh, it was a light bulb, and that happens a lot.
And that
Um,
is exactly the point that I was making earlier. During counseling, not even, I never even heard about the inner child. I had no idea. but when the counselor obviously recognized it, saying to both of us that I should have a discussion with John about this, and obviously we all agreed, and extremely emotional, but yeah, it's very, but it was something that, and the point that I'm making, using myself as an example, I never, from that point forward and before that, maybe even, I don't know, it's so long ago now, but, that I'm a supporter of this. Things are never easy. There are challenges now for everybody in North America and around the world, is that to have the ability to saying at some point that a relationship is so important that we need help along the way before it kind of runs off the deep edge, because you never attended to the delicate areas that would have been, nothing is simple, I say, but that would have been recognized by an expert, where you could have saved a potential relationship that now is going further down to, probably ending at someplace where you don't want it to be.
Yeah, I do hear people say, when they come in on their second relationship, they'll say, "Man, if I would have gone to couples therapy in in the past, I might still be with my former partner." Like, they can see how it works. It really can save relationships. And it's not uncommon for me to get people where they say, "You know what? I, I'm this isn't going to work. Our relationship is not going to work. I'm doing this for, a final, try with my partner, but I can't imagine being back on track. I can't imagine, repairing this relationship." Very often people say that. And actually, we can get there. It's definitely not impossible. And it doesn't have to even take, years or anything. It really, that inner child piece really does change everything, because
Yeah,
you have understanding, your partner sees and goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm so," after understanding that, growing up, your mom didn't show you affection, didn't show you love, and ingrained this belief that you're not lovable. Now I'm willing to do what you need to feel lovable. And it's like, wow, that changes everything.
yeah,
Um, but you need to be able to figure out what you need, or what your partner needs. And that's where people are pretty stuck. It's like they get so hopeless, and they think, "Oh my gosh, we're always fighting. We're always fighting." Well, that means that there's something deeper that we need to get to.
exactly.
Um, yeah, the fights, I tell people it's not, um, it's never what it seems to be.
Right,
If
right.
they're fighting over doing the dishes, or if they're fighting over different kinds of things, I'll ask for a few examples, but then, and that's just to understand what's that deeper meaning. Because if I'm mad at my partner for not, you know, for, uh, for not coming home on time when he said he was going to come home, it looks like that's what I'm mad about. But if we go a little deeper, maybe I'm actually feeling rejected when he does that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that'll be the theme. If we get down, I'll ask for a few examples. And when we get to that deeper meaning, usually the same one is coming up, just depending on our childhood, is going to be, you know, if I felt rejected when my husband didn't come home on time, somebody else, depending on their experience, might not feel lovable when their partner comes home late. So everyone has that different experience. So once we get there, we can also go to the inner child and have a little bit more understanding.
So moving a bit further then, Kayla, so the relationship is okay, but as years go by, it loses intimacy in the relationship. Where does that go? Or how do people recognize it and then work on it to maintain that? Because there is no reason that there cannot be intimacy, even not in older age. It's not a question of age or how long you've been in the relationship. So what is the advice, or how do you recognize it? What do you do about it? What do you suggest?
So it always goes back to being vulnerable. And usually when things are getting difficult again, and I try to equip my clients to make sure they have the tools. And I tell them, you guys are going to hit another rough patch. It just happens. That's relationships. Don't stay the same. And so I try to prepare them, when you're sensing that that disconnect, or you're not feeling so close, go back to, you know um somehow in becoming vulnerable, at the beginning. If they're practicing learning how to be vulnerable and they're not very used to it, I'll give them some kind of exercise to go home and make us, set a time at night to just connect with their partner, share a few vulnerable emotions. I'll send them a feelings list so they can be really descriptive, and communicate to their partner about anything. It could be something that happened at work or with the kids, or how they're feeling between the two of them. I was feeling really, let's see, I was feeling disappointed when, my boss didn't email me back when he said, or whatever it is. So I tell people, if they find themselves kind of drifting apart, bring back that structured time to connect, to practice with vulnerability, with some feelings. And in doing that, you also learn, you can also be vulnerable with how you're feeling in your relationship between the two of them and what you need. It feels like we're missing this. You're not like, we're not touching enough. We're not kissing. We're not hugging, the non sexual intimacy. And so that vulnerability piece allows you to, ask for what you need, and allows your partner to hopefully be open to that, and them communicate, what they need. Um, and that can really get you back on track. And I think that's really the key. It's always the vulnerability piece. So usually when people are disconnected, it's become anger again. It's become that higher non-vulnerable emotion.
It will then go towards that unless you start addressing it and understanding it. Right? So now the other part that happens a lot of times is that it's such a demanding world now in terms of how do you make, and it's not on, it's now in North America and in the rest of the world probably, and not unique to now, but now in particular, a lot of people, financially are under so much stress to meet their commitments, especially younger persons that are in relationships, have a family, and the demands of all the financial demands and their job usually put a lot of pressure on individuals, and then it makes it difficult on relationships. And then taking it one step further, entrepreneurial individuals in particular, I have experience with this, building companies, and all of a sudden, the whatever they do in their entrepreneurial pursuit, obviously with the objective of creating independence and at some point benefiting the relationship, but in the meantime, it's very demanding on a relationship, not only in time but also in terms of stress and challenges along the way. Tend to be very difficult for relationships, and a lot of times relationships suffer or discontinue because of the demands of entrepreneurship in particular, and demands on the individual physically and not on in the family.
Yeah, that something like that can be very challenging, building a business, the entrepreneurship, like all of that stuff. It can be such a huge stressor. And you're right, without appropriate tools and resources, it can absolutely separate couples because again, all that stress, that overwhelm often comes out as anger, frustration, irritability, and it, you can't necessarily separate that from home, because your partner's part of your life every day, and they're the ones hearing the frustrations, the stress, the disappointment, that your partner is experiencing, but they're just seeing the anger and the frustration. So, again, goes back to being able to verbalize that vulnerable feeling. Right now, I'm just feeling, you know, um, whatever, like I said, overwhelmed, and your partner being able to help you verbalize, what do you really need here? Like, I'm seeing all this stress, this frustration. Let's talk about it. Let's see what you're really feeling and how we can work as a team to make you not feel that way. So, like I said, if you're feeling disappointed about something, typically without resources, you might come home being stressed or, angry about it. But if you can talk to your partner and say, I'm actually really disappointed that this piece isn't going well. Well, then your partner is more likely to join your side, your team. You know, it really develops empathy. But when you come home and you're just, I'm so mad, I'm so angry, that doesn't really pull your partner in. If that makes sense, it pushes your partner away.
So that is the key question, right? So is that as you feel this, then the fear is that at what point are you able to communicate that without showing a preference or not being realistic that your partner may feel the same, or the fear of that she will potentially, or he, reject you, or it may lead to something. So in some cases, people will think that rather than, if they think something is going to be a problem, then avoid talking about it, which doesn't make the problem go away. It probably will keep adding to it. At what point then, and then if a person talks about it, it may be communications. I'm a big believer in being a good or effective communicator, but if it involves emotions and those kind of things, we don't tend to be very good at those kind of things. In the time that we are able to express it, now we are angry, and all of a sudden it goes down a hill. So what are the indicators in saying, and as I said earlier, is that I'm a believer in that most people want things to be positive. At what point do you say, or do you admit, either the male, the female, male in particular, that we may need some assistance here in helping us through this, as long as we get to the point that we cannot talk about I this and I that, but we this, and this is what we want. But can a person bring us to that or help us in this process rather than having it go down the cliff?
Yeah. The key, after being able to communicate vulnerably, the key to the listener is to be validating, right? And then your partner is going to feel heard. If they say, I'm feeling really, really hopeless with my job right now, or whatever, if they're able to get to that, and their partner says, well, that's dumb. Why are you hopeless? Like, it's fine. That's very invalidating. But if their partner can say, wow, that sounds really difficult, it sounds like you're really afraid of the future, what this could mean, and really being able to put themselves in their shoes. And so they take their experience, like they've probably felt hopeless before. And so they can relate to that feeling, maybe not for the same reason, but they can still relate to what it's like to feel hopeless in general. And so being able to communicate that will really validate your partner and encourage more vulnerability. And that's what I would do if they came into my office. I would help them get to the vulnerable piece and then their partner to respond with validation and empathy. And that's how healthy communication works, you know, and that's what encourages people to continue to communicate in a vulnerable way. Um, because again, like that anger, those angry emotions just kind of protect you. Because if you're vulnerable and you're invalidated, that can be really painful. So it's important for the listener to make you feel safe and comfortable in expressing how you're really feeling.
So the other part, Kayla, that obviously it's a changing world rapidly in numerous areas, communications in particular, and then obviously, podcasting is a good example of that because as you and me are sitting here, me in Central British Columbia and you in Denver, Colorado, we're talking about relationships and things that are very private to us and showing vulnerability, in individuals. But at the same time, we know that being podcasting on virtual TV, we sharing our podcast with people around the globe. So tens of thousands of people are watching us and drawing information from this that may be helpful to them to a certain extent as we share our information in privacy, in particular on my part and with you, is saying that, so where do we go, that if we want to get counseling, like in your case, in the cases that I've been involved in, it has been mainly person to person. So, Kayla Crane, I engaged you for counseling, my wife and myself. So then you would say, okay, come to my office and blah, 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 hypothetically speaking. Or is it changing more where the personal part of it is likely very, very important. But do we also, and in your case, do you also do counseling online or virtual in some form?
Yeah, I would say I see clients about half are in person and the other half are virtual. Um, it doesn't, people ask about it a lot if it's gonna, how different it is. And I don't see a difference in success rates. I find virtual just as successful as in person. Occasionally I have people that are, they very much want in person for a variety of reasons. And then, sometimes they say, "Oh, we won't be able to get to the office like summertime right now in between school."
Yeah.
Um that's a good example because they might have come to the office while their kids were in school, but that's not an option during summer. So they'll say, "Can we switch over to virtual for a few weeks?" Because we can't leave the house, leave our kids. So and I get almost every time I have somebody who has been consistently coming in person and they have to switch to virtual for a couple sessions, it's, almost every time they say, actually, that wasn't that different. It actually didn't seem as almost disconnecting as they had imagined it would have been. We definitely get it's just a little bit of a different like vibe, but for the most part, I would say it's not that different. We get the same work done, so it is a personal preference. Like I said, I don't really see a difference in success.
So my experience, and obviously I'm a podcaster and I'm very, very active podcasting around the globe. It feels to me sitting here with you, I've never met you before. We started our podcast nearly an hour ago, and we have had some very private, confidential in a lot of areas, conversations that people normally would not have. But it feels to me like you sitting with me here. I do some podcasting live with people, that I podcast in my studio, but my experience has been that, and you are a good example of that, but I do it a lot of times with other people that I podcast from around the world. It feels like you're right here. And so as I look forward and then looking for expertise in certain areas or viewpoints in certain, or whatever they may be, but we podcast about that. Podcasting is only, in my opinion, at its very beginning. It will expand globally more and more, and it's still on its infancy, and it will become more and more part of the new media, if you will. And like in our case, this podcast will be available to the world and on YouTube and all over the place, probably later on today, no later than tomorrow morning. And we will do virtually no editing on it. It is what it is. And on topics that are very, very important to a lot of people, and talking about relationships, in particular communications, and all the other things that are very, very important, and I'm sure will be helpful to some people. Now, the other part that I was going to ask you, do you have a website that we can show, before we end our podcast, and how to contact you, and then we will show it on our podcast as we present it to the globe. And the other part that I should mention, you likely are podcasting, is that for people watching us, subscribe to our podcast. It encourages to do more of these kind of podcasting around the world globally. Subscribe to it, share it with others, like it, and comment on it. And so you agree with me that podcasting likely will become a media that will become much more active, where you can consult people from around the globe on issues that apply to relationships all around the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, myself, I've learned so much from particular podcasts, with interviews from people. And that's what I hope I provided a couple actionable, tools that people can utilize in their own relationship. Um, because that's really valuable. That is a difference that comes with podcasting, right? We have access, listeners have access to just, I mean, an um, unlimited amount of content on, you can really search for anything, and that's really valuable. You can hear interviews with experts in all fields depending on, what you're looking for. So I do think it can be really invaluable, just the amount of access we have at our fingertips. Um, my website is www.southdenvertherapy.com, and I'm also on Instagram as South Denver Therapy.
Kayla, it was an amazing podcast on very interesting topics that will be with us forever now, but in particular, what I've heard from you is that recognizing it and then involving a third party can be very helpful in a lot of cases. You're a good example of that. And communication, critically important, and especially talking about we, not I, and recognizing the other person, developing a friendship and relationships is important. And again, Kayla, thank you for being on my podcast, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Kayla. Take care.
You too.
Are you still there?
Yes. Yeah.
How did it go?
You tell me. I felt
I
like
like
I
it. I
stumbled
love
a
it.
lot.
Yeah, no, I love it because it's such an important topic, and then I like the idea of sharing some of my experiences, because it certainly helped me, and I find, as you already recognized, that the message I have to males in particular, that recognizing if there are challenges, that are in some cases emotional, the relationship is more important than anything else, and you don't want to put it at risk simply for not recognizing that, and it's always confidential, and so it's been very, very helpful, and that's something that at least I could share with you. And then I appreciate you have an amazing amount of experience, and and so helpful to many,
Yeah, no,
many
I
others.
really enjoyed it. I think that's great. People do connect. I self-disclose a little bit more than typical, because people connect with that, your own personal stories, and
Exactly.
that is how I build rapport with people. I say, I've been through in my marriage, I go to couples therapy sometimes, I struggle with the same things. Sometimes I go to that anger and not the vulnerability, or,
Exactly.
because, you know, when people hear that, like, oh, okay, it's normal to have these things. It's normalizing.
And I think that's the big benefit of what we are doing. Like as we are sitting here talking at this, you and me, we just met when the start of this podcast, and sharing those ideas and are helpful to people, especially knowing that tens of thousands of people are watching us around the world. And I think that's very,
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah.
Kayla,
Yeah. Hopefully they picked up that it's not uncommon to ask for help.
exactly. In fact, just the opposite is very common. Thanks,
Yeah,
Kayla.
exactly.
I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Reach out if you need anything in the
O-
future.
Okay, take care. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks. You too. Bye bye.